Hello, this is Dr. Bob Evans, and welcome to our podcast, Parental Alienation from Couch to Courtroom and Beyond. We will discuss the resisting and refusing dynamic, commonly referred to as parental alienation, how you'll know it's happening in your case, and what can be done about it. Parental alienation can cause stress and trauma in high-conflict cases. These podcasts focus on how attorneys and mental health professionals can support families and children. Well, welcome back. We are talking, episode 28, and continuing with the discussion of an article by Nick Woodall. Last time I remember speaking, and I think I gave credit to Karen Woodall, and it's actually, this is an article actually by Nick, her husband, the alienated child, responding to cases of post-separation parental rejection. And previously we were talking about how the child is put in this double bind situation between both of the parents. And so Nick points out that a lot of these alienation cases, really one of the parents, i.e. the favorite or the alienating parent, usually present with some kind of a pathological personality trait. And among these we know are narcissistic, emotional unstable, borderline, histrionic, paranoid, obsessive-compulsive, sociopathic personality disorders. And this has been documented in the literature in a number of places. And the point that he's trying to make here is that it needs to be recognized that whether this alienating behavior by this parent is either conscious and deliberate, or whether it's unconscious and rooted in the parent's own psychological difficulties that basically harm the child regardless, the same way. So it's not so much an issue of, how or why the child's being manipulated. Either way, or for whatever reason, the child is then harmed. And so it's not a question of motive or what's doing it. The issue is the results of the consequences are basically the same. So one of the keys that he points out about resolving these cases is that there's really a collaborative effort between the legal community and the mental health community. And that's really the heart of how these cases actually have to be resolved. It's not one or the other. It can't be resolved simply through litigation, and it can't be resolved strictly through a mental health process. It really requires both. And the reason is that at some level, in an alienation case, there's this disproportionate level of power that one of the parents has. And Nick describes it as an asymmetric power relationship. And the only way that can be undone is legally, through the court system. So therapeutic interventions are highly unlikely to be effective while that power dynamic is in existence. And until that is taken away and leveled out, then we're not going to be able to resolve these problems in alienation cases. So legal interventions that don't provide any kind of therapeutic input are going to maybe offer some structural changes in the family, but it still leaves a risk of leaving the child in this psychologically split situation, and ultimately is going to fail to address the underlying problems for the child. So this is what really is necessary. We've been talking about this for years too. It's not just one or the other that's going to solve this problem. It's really going to take both mental health and legal. He addresses the whole idea of what we call basically here social investigations, custody evaluations. They have to involve an assessment that observes the family over a period of time. It can't just be a short snapshot here or there and have any kind of meaningful input to the court. He's saying that best the court needs to really understand how the family system functions, and the way to do that is having these investigations observe the family over a period of time. And, that takes time. It takes money, unfortunately. And he basically talks to the issue that there's a familiar pattern to these cases, and boy, there sure is. It's almost as if somebody is in the background orchestrating the strategies of teaching these parents how to institute the alienation strategies and tactics. Anyway, basically need to understand the severity of the reaction in the child and identify the causal dynamics. Why is this happening? How is this happening? We talk about it's being counter instinctual for children to reject a parent. Children don't reject parents. It just doesn't happen. Somebody more often than not is orchestrating the situation. Oh, can a child reject a parent if they're excessively abusive and neglectful? And yes, that can happen, but it has to be at such an extreme level that it's going to be a relatively rare event. So that's a big distinction. When you see a child rejecting a parent, if you're a mental health professional and you see a child rejecting the parent, you need to understand why that's happening. And in more often than not, in a vast majority of the cases, it's not because of the rejected or targeted parent. It's going to be a function of the relationship between the child and the favored parent. We frequently miss that connection. So it needs to happen in as a result of the assessment, is that it needs to be a discovery, an illumination, if you will, of the individual and the family dynamics that are causing the child's reaction, the reaction being rejection of a parent, and then understanding the degree to which the family dynamics can be orchestrated, can be treated in order to relieve the child of the need to split. Keep in mind that the splitting is a defense for the child so they can exist in this dysfunctional relationship. It's a form of adjustment. And so what we need to do is find out, get the details and understand this particular circumstances so that that defensive reaction doesn't have to be implemented by the child because it's harmful to the child. One of the things that comes up frequently and more recently is this whole argument that we have to listen to the child. We need to pay attention to what the child is doing and saying, and we need to adhere to what the child is. That doesn't mean that the child's in a position to make a decision about what relationship he's going to have, and we can understand that. The children are not mature enough to make those kinds of decisions. So the court needs to have this balance, if you will, between the welfare of the child and the child's right to have their views taken into consideration. Children's wishes and feelings are reported to be highly unreliable. The research tells us how vulnerable children are to peer pressure, how vulnerable they are to influence, how easy it is to create false memories, etc. And that needs to be understood. Richard Warshak, back in 2003, argued that although alienated children may be outspoken in their custodial preferences, their wishes may not reflect their best interests, and notes that giving children's wishes and feelings paramount weight in determining the outcome of such cases really puts a burden on the child with having a responsibility and an impossible task of managing the adult world around them. Children should not be put in that position. Look, we don't do that with children in any other part of our environment or our society. We have child labor laws. Children not supposed to go out and work because they're taken advantage of by employers. Children can't join the army without their parents' permission at some level. They can't drive a car. They can't do a whole lot of things per our society. So it doesn't make any sense that they should be able to make a decision about which parent they're going to live with. Claywar and Rivlin wrote a book called Children Held Hostage, published by the American Bar Association. They looked at 1,000 cases, and they identified that even under a court order, traditional therapies are little, if any, benefit in regard to treating children in this kind of an abusive situation. Alienation is child abuse. So we're coming back to talk about the therapy that's needed in these cases. A number of our authors, Fiedler, Bala, Saini, back in 2013, they argued that therapy in more severe cases, which can even include some moderate cases, some moderate levels of alienation, can be associated with alienation becoming more entrenched. In other words, some therapy, unless conducted with someone who's really knowledgeable about this phenomenon, can actually exacerbate, can make the situation worse. It turns out there's research that says there's absolutely no reports of successful treatment of even mild or medium levels of alienation, that do not include the reestablishment of contact between the child and the rejected parent. And it's important to recognize that any intervention that requires the child's acceptance is doomed to fail because the child's caught in a dynamic that compels them to resist. They're in a dynamic that's causing them to actually reject that parent. Any treatment intervention must primarily be the healing of the splitting defense in the child. The first principle of therapy, of treatment, therefore, is to heal the child's internal split through therapeutically managed exposure to the split off object, i.e., to manage their exposure to the rejected parent in order to activate suppressed attachment bond. In other words, as a function of being split from his targeted parent, a previously loved parent, and I wouldn't say previously, they obviously are still a loved parent, but in order to recreate that relationship or to reestablish that relationship, there has to be more contact with that parent, and it has to be done as quickly as possible. One of the things we find in our legal system is that because their dockets are so full or there's so many cases, then we have a problem with getting these cases through in a timely manner, and that just makes the problem that much worse. So we're saying that the court has to take responsibility for the management of these cases in the sense of the dynamics around the child and ensure that there's protection of the child from the favored or alienating parents' behaviors. Assuming that that's the cause of the problem, that has to be managed. And it can't be managed through a therapist because they don't have the power to do it. It has to be managed through the courts. So critical to the success of any intervention is the team that's around the child. That's the legal team, that's the therapeutic team. And the role of the judge is to keep all of the professionals in line and going in the same direction, as well as the parents. And so any kind of reunification plan that is vital, as any plan is as strong as the weakest link. That is, the professionals are the key to making the reunification plans work, but the court needs to be there to monitor process and make sure things that people are doing what they need to do. You can have parents ordered to go participate, but if they don't participate, they don't bring the child to see the other parent in terms of time sharing, then it's not going to be a successful intervention. Sometimes, and then we find out this is very important, that when the progress towards restoration of the child's relationship with the targeted or rejected parent, it gets stalled, the court may have to consider whether to change the residency of the child, whether custody needs to be flipped, in other words. If the child is in its maladaptive defensive dynamic and the favored parent is resisting the process of reunification, it may have to be that the court's going to have to terminate that child's residency and put the child with the targeted parent. What we hear frequently is how the change of residence is going to be such a draconian, harmful process to the child that we can't even consider it. But removing the child from the harm and placing the child with a safe and good enough parent offers the child some relief from the psychological distress in the short term and provides protection in the long term. One of the things key is there's absolutely no research to demonstrate or document that removing the child from one home to the other in these cases is harmful or has caused any harm. There's no research to support the draconian warnings that experts will come into court and talk about. Obviously, the consideration here is that the child may need to be protected from the harmful behaviors of a parent in order for the intervention to have any kind of success, as well as supporting the child during this whole process, and so that they can retain a positive relationship with the previously loved. And I say previously loved, it's as if the love has gone away. It hasn't gone away, okay? It's just been interrupted. So one of the concerns that we notice in the research in terms of the concerns that we have in terms of the functioning that affects in adults who were alienated. In other words, people who were alienated as children, they grew up as adults, what happened to them? And Amy Baker is one of the best ones to talk about the consequences of this. But some of the consequences included low self-esteem, a lack of trust in themselves and others, depression, drug alcohol problems, and alienation from their own children when they get married and ultimately get divorced. And you think about, how do we learn how to be parents? We learn how to be parents by watching our parents. So if I'm living with a parent who is alienating me from another parent, I'm learning the strategies and the tactics of getting what I want, as dysfunctional as it may be. But that's how I'm learning how to be a parent, by watching this dysfunction. And we need to break that cycle. It's very much like the cycle of abuse in families. The long-term issue here is that the obligation of the court is to keep a child in the long term, and so that they have a positive welfare and can grow up in a healthy manner, having access to both parents if that's possible, and if it's not, at least to have a healthy childhood that can grow up and to be a healthy adult so they can function. Okay. Well, I hope this is helpful. Like you all keep listening. And by the way, we're going to have a quick Q&A coming up in September, and that's open to anyone who wants to come in. It's going to be a Zoom session. Dr. Bone and I will be answering questions. Might be a short little presentation, but not much of one, because this audience really knows what alienation is. So you're all welcome to tune in. And I think the notice has gone out to Facebook and a number of other social medias. So look forward to it, and thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today. For more information on this topic, please visit www.drbobevans.com or www.naopas.com. We offer classes for both legal and mental health professionals to help educate them on the signs and strategies of parental alienation and how to move forward for a healthier environment for the children of divorce. Please visit www.naopas.com and sign up for our courses and use coupon code PODCAST for a 50% discount.